Hello, everyone. My name is Sandy Reed, and along with Kim Lytle and Heather Lansky, we are here to present, with my great excitement, the first RMC webinar. The RMC is the Research Methodology Center, which is part of the College of Education and Human Ecology, and we try to provide professional development for folks here in the college. And so we're very pleased to bring to you today Heather Lansky, who is the Manager of Quality Data Reporting in the Office of Research. And we're being joined and mentored by Kim Lytle, who's the Director of the EHE Office of Research, to help us here with our first webinar. So she's going to try to make sure that this is a good experience for all of us. So thank you to both Heather and Kim, for your help in doing this first webinar. So without further ado, I guess I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let me see if I can. Oh, there we go. Okay.
I'll just advance it for you since it's on my screen.
That's helpful. As I said, the EHE Research Methodology Center is located in Arps Hall, room 173. We offer consulting services in qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods. We also offer professional development in the format of a lot of workshops and presentations, and we're also available to help you with information and resources. This is me. I'm Sandy Reed, and I just going to leave my video on there just to introduce myself, and then I'll take a break. But I want to remind all of you that our RMC services are free, and they're available for folks in the College of EHE and in the larger OSU community. So if you have a need, if you feel like you'd like some additional information about what we provide or would like to connect with us for a consulting session, please just email us at rmc@osu.edu or check out our website. That's the best way to contact us. Also want to introduce the EHE Office of Research. We are a part of that office. The RMC works very closely with the Office of Research to, again, assist our community here in building our capacity for research, and especially high quality research. And the Office of Research also does a lot of their own events, and they've highlighted the availability of the archives for all their past sessions there with this link here in the PowerPoint slide. As I'm recording this session as well, we will make this available to all of you on the RMC website. With no further ado, then, I'm going to turn this over to Heather, and she can get us started talking about survey tools.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. It's my pleasure to be here today and talk some about survey tools. This is only the second webinar format that I've done, so bear with me. I'm still learning Carbon Connect. I'm much more accustomed to doing these things in person. So we will get rolling along here. This is very informal. If you have questions along the way, feel free to type in the chat window, and Sandy or Kim will get my attention and we'll get it answered for you. So the agenda that we have, we're going to start with the data. One of the key elements in deciding which tool to use is the data itself. Data security, study structure, study population are all important considerations. Each of the tools that we're going to talk about today have strengths and challenges in each of these areas. The specific tools we're going to talk about are StudyTracks, TellForm, Redcap, and Qualtrics. We're going to kind of walk through each one of those as we go along, and then we'll leave some time at the end for some additional questions if there are specific use cases folks want to talk through. So we're going to jump right in with some data classifications and definitions. These come from the OSU Institutional Data Policy, which is one of the files that is uploaded within this presentation. There's the entire research policy as well as these classifications, just so that you can have that for your reference. There are these 4 classifications of data, public, internal, private, and restricted. I won't walk through what all of them mean, but it's very important to know that there are differences and there are different levels of security required for each one of those levels. So the 2 that I'm going to talk a little bit about are private and restricted. The line between those can be a little muddy, especially if you're crossing between medical research or academic research. In deciding the tool, generally the highest security wins. So if you have just one element that falls into the restricted data category, then you have to follow the rules for that category. If there's any doubt at all, check with the IRB. This is just a partial list. I selected this just to kind of give a flavor for some of the differences between private and restricted. The entire list is available at the link at the top of the slide. It's also one of the handouts that's uploaded to the files. So all of the data that are classified as S4 or restricted can be collected from any of the tools we're talking about today except for Qualtrics. At this time, Qualtrics hasn't been approved for S4 data. As far as I know, that is in the works. They are working toward that, but the last I was aware, it had not yet been approved. I'll give it another quick little caveat here. All of the information I'm providing today is to the best of my knowledge. A couple of these tools, I've used all the tools that we're talking about, but a couple of them I've been away from for a little while, so there may be a few changes and updates that I'm not aware of. But my goal is just to provide an overview of what's out there. I don't know that very many people are aware of a couple of these tools. So as we said, the other considerations are longitudinal studies. They require the special consideration because of the need of their repeated measures and the need for monitoring responses over time, especially if you've got complex scheduling like a medication dose adjustment schedule, where it's very important that participants stick to a strict routine of when forms are completed. The tool that can be used for multi-center trials should also be taken into account, because you would have to think about the knowledge of the study staff. What is the technical knowledge that they have in using these tools? And what's the common hardware and software among all the different sites? Again, you kind of have to go to the lowest common denominator or something that everybody is going to be able to use. And finally, the specific study population can be a driver in choosing your tool. If you're looking at an elderly population or young children, both of those have pretty specific requirements of what people are going to be able to do and how the form should be formatted to that population. We also have a number of research studies that occur in the Amish population, as well as in Southern Ohio in the Appalachian communities, and those both present their own unique challenges in terms of data collection and study tools. So those are really kind of the three main things that I think about in terms of what is going to drive my decision about my tool. So why these tools? Why do we pick these ones? Obviously, there's probably hundreds of different tools out there, but the ones that we're talking about today are the ones that are really recommended and supported here on campus. In the case of Redcap and Qualtrics, those are the only two online survey tools that are really have the seal of approval. If you have a compelling case for using SurveyMonkey or SurveyGizmo, you should make that case to the OCIO. They have bought into Qualtrics at the enterprise level, and they were really encouraging Qualtrics for most uses. As we'll talk about later, Redcap has a couple of unique features that may make it an alternative choice as well, and that is approved for data collection across campus, not just at the medical center. TellForm and StudyTracks and Survey Suite, those are all readily available to faculty and staff on campus. The difference with those three is those are all fee for service. You have to buy into either a licensing agreement or pay those folks for access to those tools. So there's two other data collection tools that are on campus that we're not going to talk about. One is Encore, and the reason that I'm not choosing to talk about that one is it's really exclusive to the Cancer Center. I don't know if we have some Cancer Center folks on the call with us, but it's a pretty narrow group of people that can access that, so I wasn't going to go into detail. And the other one is Survey Suite, which is available for the Center for Human Resources Research. I'm not covering that one primarily because I don't have any personal experience with it. I don't feel like I have the depth of knowledge to be able to talk about it the way that I would like to. What I do know is that they have the longest history of data collection on campus. They've been running the National Longitudinal Survey for many years. They also have pretty extensive experience in call center and other longitudinal survey data collection. So if you're working with either one of those conditions, I would definitely consider reaching out to them and talking to them about what they offer, and what their tools are, and what's available. So everything that we talked about, or we're going to talk about today, I tried to come up with the best balance between cost, features, security, and the ease of use. So we vetted through these tools, and these are the ones that we've selected to talk to you about. So why does it matter? If you're using an established data collection tool, it it really, aside from the differences in features and functionality, any data collection tool offers many advantages over Word or Excel. That includes consistency of data collection, accountability for what was done and how it was done, the quality of the data, and the process improvement that you reduce some of that delay from research to practice when you're using an automated tool of some kind. Word and Excel, although convenient, are really inefficient, error prone, and it's become unnecessary when we have these other alternatives available. So the first one we're going to talk about is StudyTracks. StudyTracks is a vendor-based tool, meaning that you purchase it directly from ScienceTracks. It's probably the least known of this group. And the CEO is John Putsky, and he's very involved in the project development, all the way from grant writing to publication. So if you get him early on in the process, he will work with you on gathering all of the security documentation and everything that you need to know about using StudyTracks in your project. So some of the pros with StudyTracks is they have a participant-facing dashboard, which is really unique to all of these tools that we're talking about. StudyTracks is the only one that offers a dashboard that specifically reaches to the participants. And this allows the information exchange back and forth between study personnel and the participant. A good use case for that would be any kind of study where participants need to monitor their progress, or maybe they need to submit daily questionnaires like a food log or a mood diary, something that they are going to be in and out of a lot. It provides them instant feedback. It's very customizable. You basically tell ScienceTracks what you want and they build it. It's got a core platform, but it's very flexible in terms of look and feel and what you can do with it. The study staff works directly with the development team to bring that out. It's really the only tool of the group that has an eye on publication as well. That was one of their main goals in developing the tool, is helping publication happen. All too often folks gather data and then they spend a long time analyzing, and there's quite a delay between the data collection and publication. So it's got a number of modules in it that are specifically geared towards getting that publication out the door. StudyTracks has a very robust customer support and analysis feature, so it provides a lot of tables and scatter plots and things that are really ready to go into a publication, and it provides some tracking of publication as well. So some of the cons with StudyTracks is setup is complex. There's really no way for study staff to do it on their own. You have to contract with StudyTracks to build it for you. The other piece being data stored on their servers. But that said, they are approved for restricted data collection, and they are also 21 CFR compliant, if that applies to you. So unlike many other cloud-based or off-site storage, they've gone through a pretty rigorous process to be approved for research data collection, and they have all the documentation they can provide for you to back that up. As I said, they're fee for service. I've lost track of what their current rates are, so you need to reach out to them and talk to them about it. I do know they provide volume discounts if you're doing a study of 100,000 people. They cut the price for that. The last I knew was kind of based on per response or per participant. And I think they also do some student licensing. Um, a couple of caveats about existing data. If you've already done a pilot study or have already collected some data that you want to include with your StudyTracks data, they will charge you an additional fee to upload that data and convert it into the StudyTracks format. It's a pretty niche tool, but I think it's worth being aware of because for the right circumstances, it's really an excellent tool. It's probably more than what's needed for smaller studies, um, but like I say, I think it's worth noting what it is. So now we'll just walk through a couple of screenshots of what StudyTracks looks like. This gives you an idea of its look and feel and a little bit of its functionality. This is the dataset view that has information about your data exporting. You can export your data out of StudyTracks to all of the major stat packages, SPSS, SAS, Excel. I would say the exports that come out of StudyTracks are among the best of all the data tools. It is fairly seamless to get the data out and pulled into some other package. It's pretty comprehensive and pretty easy to use. This is a screenshot of the Workbench functionality. This is what it looks like to track the various publications and reports that you may need to do. I'm going to attempt to use the laser pointer here. We'll see how this goes. So this would be your IRB report. If you're doing Data Safety Monitoring Board reports, you can track whether it's been published, whether it's been made public, what's contained in the report. There's really a whole suite of things that you can track in your reporting. This is an example of how customizable the StudyTracks interface is. The level of control you have over graphics and layout really isn't available in most of the other formats. It's pretty much a blank slate, and you write what you need to go in there. And as you can see, this is a clinical summary for this person, so it could be really useful to the MD. I don't know what their interface is with the electronic medical record. The last I knew, they were working on that, and that's been some time ago now. So there may be an opportunity there as well. Laser pointer is fighting me now. This view is those reporting functions I was talking about that you can use for your manuscripts or presentations or just general study management. It's a way to look at your data as you go along, which is something that I recommend and I think all too often isn't done. You wait until you've got all the data before you look at it, and sometimes you can pick up on trends or perhaps even problems with the data before you get that far along. So that this is a good way to keep an eye on that. So now we're going to switch over to TellForm and we'll talk about its features, and we'll do the same type of thing for all these. We'll walk through the pros and cons, and then we'll look at some screenshots. So like StudyTracks, TellForm is vendor-based. You purchase a license. At OSU, it's fee for service. OSU does have some licenses available, but you work with the OSU organization on them helping you design the forms and use it. But that's really where the similarity ends with TellForm and StudyTracks or really any of the other tools that we're talking about. And that's because TellForm is the only paper-based tool that we're going to talk about. They're designed using optical mark recognition, which is similar to the bubble form format that people are familiar with standardized testing, the Scantron type of thing. However, TellForm has data entry capabilities beyond just bubbles. It can do constrained print, which is one letter per box, as well as open-ended text. The handwriting recognition still isn't all that great, but it's come a long way from where it was. So it's definitely worth considering if you need to collect open-ended data like that. Mouse is not being friendly. TellForm was also one of the first companies that offered electronic data collection, so they've been doing this for a very long time. Their primary client, I would say, is large entities, the U.S. government, state governments, large corporations. I started out in TellForm, so I'm a little bit of a TellForm geek. I've collected some samples of TellForms as I've come across them in my civilian life. I've received a survey from Giant Eagle that was a TellForm. On the plane to Hawaii, the little form you filled out about what fruits and vegetables you're carrying, that was a TellForm. So I'm a data geek, I admit it. I collect that kind of stuff. So the pros with TellForm are the data collection is not reliant on internet connectivity. And as we talked about before, some populations, that's a big deal. If you're going into a place where internet connection is spotty or non-existent or culturally not appropriate, paper is your best friend. And if you're going to do paper, there's no better than TellForm to collect data from paper. The other advantage of TellForm is that the data are stored on OSU servers, so it is approved for S4 data. It's secured, it's behind the firewall, all the things that are required. But the advantage to TellForm as a paper form over Word or something else is there's no manual data involved. Because you're scanning the data, you don't have that error rate that you have with somebody hand entering data. It's scanned in through a scanner, and then there's a module that reads that data off of the form, and then you can have an operator that's running the verifier module where they're just actually looking at what the computer has read and making sure that the computer has read it correctly. With the bubbles, the bubble format, it's 99% accurate, especially if the bubble's filled in completely. If somebody kind of makes a little mark off to the side of the bubble, it can miss it. But if TellForm's configured right, it can be very, very accurate. The cons to that is the trade-off for the accuracy is the complexity of setting up a TellForm. I wouldn't recommend that anybody try to learn TellForm on their own. It's a beast to try to learn. The user interface is a hot mess. It requires a basic knowledge of database design because as you're building the form, you're also building the database backend. So it's helpful to have some knowledge about what that's going to look like, what your data is going to look like on the back end. Because you have to print the forms, it's difficult to make post-production changes. Because TellForm works on that optical mark recognition technology, everything's on a precise location on the page, which makes photocopying not an option. Everything has to be printed as an original. So once you've got those forms out in the field, it can be difficult to pull them back and distribute new forms if you've made a change. Uniprint does have some experience with printing TellForms, so that's an option. There's also several commercial printers that have experience with it that you could seek out. Of course, you can also buy your own printer and supplies and do it yourself. But again, that can get costly fairly quickly, buying printers and toner and paper. And if you're going to do your own processing, you need a scanner or paying for processing. This is a kind of an outdated workflow of what the TellForm process looks like. Basically, the forms are designed and then they're distributed. You can fax them out, you can mail them out, you can hand them out. A lot of the longitudinal studies that we did, we would give each participant a binder that contained all their forms for the length of the study. Once the data are collected, you can fax them back in, or you can hand them back in where they're scanned. I should say there are commercial operations that do this on a very large scale. So if you're looking at a large multi-center trial, that might be the way to go. But once the data are scanned in and read by the reader module, then the verifier can look at it and make sure that all the data are appropriately in there, and then you commit it to your database. I'll give a quick plug for the TellForm contact on campus. That's Bob Rice. He's over in the Nysanger Center. He's really kind of been my mentor over the years, and I can recommend that he is a SQL and database guru. If you want to know anything about research databases, he's your guy. There's really, I don't think, much he doesn't know about, especially TellForm and SQL collaborations. So this is what a pretty standard TellForm looks like. You can pipe text in not quite the same way you do in Redcap or Qualtrics, but you can see that it's pre-filled in here with some terms and a subject number and whatnot. For longitudinal studies, piping this text in from one visit to the next is really useful. It's also, when it's pre-filled like this, it's almost 100% accurate. The computer is very good at reading its own handwriting. This is a little bit more complex and customized forms. Like StudyTracks, it's flexible enough to incorporate graphics alongside your data points. It's really only its limitation is the size of the page. You can use that real estate pretty much any way you want to, and put different data point collection fields on it. So it's pretty flexible in that standpoint. A final unique point about TellForm is the ability to capture data points that may vary between participants. For example, maybe a medication list or the schools that a person attended. Anything that's going to be, one person might have 5 of them, one person might have 2. The traditional data collection requires a helper field to set that number of responses that are going to be presented to the participant. So you have to guess, what's the maximum number of medications that this participant's going to have? And then you build it out to say, how many medications do you have? And then the form shrinks and grows based on the number that they put into that box. On the other hand, TellForm is able to read only the data that are on the form. It's configured to collect this variable data. One way of looking at it is the traditional format is wide, and TellForm is able to collect it in a narrow format, which with multiple records per participant and each column containing the data, so you don't have to do any transformation on the back end to get all of the data into a single column. And now we'll move on to Redcap. Redcap is consortium-based. Vanderbilt created it, and OSU joined the consortium. So as a consortium member, it offers Redcap to us for free through the Center for Clinical and Translational Science over at the Medical Center. It's the only tool that was specifically designed for research data, and that's really where the name comes from is Research Electronic Data Capture is what it stands for. The pros with Redcap is it's got a pretty good user interface. It's pretty quick and easy to build a Redcap form, and you can even use Excel for form design. I wouldn't recommend doing that right out of the gate until you're familiar with Redcap's formatting. You can't just design anything in Excel and load it up. It has a pretty specific format that things have to be in, but it can, once you get familiar with it, it can be very quick to design forms using Excel and then uploading it. As I said before, it has been approved to collect S4 data, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. You have the ability to split your data collection into separate arms. So if you have an intervention and a control group, you can split those out within the same project. So it makes it a good choice also for longitudinal studies because it can accommodate those repeated measures and the custom temporal relationship between those events. It even includes an integrated study calendar, so you could print that calendar out for the participant. You can keep track of study visits that way, whether they showed up or they didn't show up or whatever happened. You can provide some notations about a particular visit down to the individual subject level. They also have a shared library of several validated instruments. Most of them are clinical in nature, but they do have some measures like a depression scale, social support, some of those other types of validated instruments. And the library's grown. It's fairly extensive now, and that can be a huge value if you're using some of those standardized tools that you can just pull those forms in. They've already been designed, they've already been tested. The scoring is accurate. So I would definitely recommend it for that. It also is the only one of these tools that has a built-in audit trail and data quality module. So if it's important to record all the changes that were made to every record, if that's something that you need to provide to a monitoring board, it has it right there. It does it automatically for you. By data quality module, I mean you can run queries on the data to find out if there's missing data, if there's data that's out of the validation range. You can assign those records to another reviewer to fix them. It's got a pretty robust workflow for managing data quality. All of the data collected from Redcap is on OSU servers. It's not in the cloud. And as I said before, it's pretty low to no cost. The only cost that you'll incur is if you need some kind of customized programming or additional functionality that's not out of the box with Redcap. The cons to Redcap is that the design is pretty inflexible. It's pretty much what you see is what you get. You can do some additional formatting, but it requires some programming language familiarity. JavaScript, I think, and I think you can do some things in some other languages, but it definitely requires a developer's assistance to be able to change the look and feel of a Redcap form. You can do some simple things like whether the question is vertical or horizontal, and you can do a little bit of playing with layout, but it's pretty narrow in how you can configure it. Because it's a consortium, they're always creating new and revised features. There's always stuff in development, and sometimes the functionality that you need isn't available yet, or it's still in the development pipeline. It's a pretty mature tool at this point. When I first started using it, it was fairly new, but I would put it maybe just a step or two below Qualtrics in terms of the breadth of features that are available. So it's a pretty good option, and it's the only option if you're going to collect S4 data in an online format. The last thing that I knew, the installation at OSU wasn't 21 CFR compliance, but that may be one of those things that has changed. As I said before, Redcap has two separate installations. One is on a server that sits outside the medical center firewall, and one is inside the medical firewall. The one that's outside is accessible from any internet connection anywhere. You can get access just by having your name dot number. You just talk to the CCTS group. They'll approve. They'll review your study, what you're doing. They'll approve you for use, and you're ready to go. Obviously, that instance can't contain that restricted data. So if you need restricted data, then you're going to be on the instance that's inside the medical center firewall. And for that, you need an OSU Medical Center login. You can work through the CCTS to obtain that. There's no barrier saying that because you're on the academic side of campus, you can't have a medical center login, but it requires a whole separate process and a whole separate ground check, which can be a lengthy process. So if you think you're going to want to go that route, I would put those wheels in motion fairly soon because it does take some time to get all of that cleared. If you're going to be using Redcap outside of the medical center internet connection, outside of the medical center Wi-Fi, that's also going to be an additional cost because you need to get a secure ID key fob to be able to do that. And that's one of the unfortunate things about our campus is we are still on two separate Wi-Fi grids. The academic Wi-Fi is not the same as the medical center Wi-Fi. Oh, I see a message pop up that says that the secure ID is no longer required. That is awesome because that was a hurdle that really prevented a lot of people from using it. So I'm glad to hear that is no longer. As I say, that one can contain S4 data. So the types of projects you can have in a Redcap container can be surveys. They can just be your standard anonymous surveys, or that you can send them out to a known list of people. You can schedule those surveys to be sent out on a particular schedule, whether it be every 2 weeks or every 6 months, or you set that all up ahead of time, and it will take care of all of that deployment for you. You can also do data entry forms on the study personnel side of the fence, which is a unique feature of Redcap. That's something that Qualtrics doesn't really offer, and that's something that the study personnel would add additional information, whether it would be stuff they've taken from the medical record or interviews or anything similar like that. Um, the data entry forms can be just one form used only one time, or they can be longitudinal across multiple events. And you can do any combination of those functions. So you could do all surveys or all data entry or a mix of both. And so this is what the Redcap interface looks like. This is a screenshot of kind of the entry page, the landing page of projects. You can have multiple projects, so more than one study, and you would just enter your, click on whichever project you want to look at. It shows you how many records are currently in that database, how many fields are collectively across all the forms, and what you have in it. Is it a survey? Are they forms? Is it a form and a survey? And it tells you the status of it with the little pencil icon. That means it's still in development. Nothing has been deployed yet. And you'll see they have some tabs up here for training resources. They have some pretty good videos on using the different functions. And they also have just a short help and FAQ. So this is the design module in Redcap of what it looks like to get in and start designing a form. As I said, I think it's pretty straightforward, especially if you used any other survey builder or even Google Forms. If you have any experience with form design at all, it's pretty similar. There's also a pretty standard list of field types. You've got text boxes, calculated fields, multiple choice, multiple answer, file upload. They do have signature fields, which can be used like on an iPad. You can use a finger to sign things. I've kind of lost track on how that counts for things like consent. That would be something to talk to the CCTS about, what the rules are with the digital signatures. And this is a screenshot of the management console that I talked about in managing a longitudinal study. So you can see that each participant has a record ID, and then each form or each event has a status associated with it, and they've used this color-coded scheme for green is complete, yellow is unverified, red is incomplete, and then they have a little separate scheme for survey completed data, so you know if the survey has been completed or whether it's a partial response. So you can really at a glance kind of tell where these participants are in their study path. The unverified option is optional. You don't have to use that. The way that I most often saw it implemented was if somebody in the meantime was going to take a second look at it, or there was something that needed to happen to it before it was finalized. So if a participant filled out a survey and then there was maybe some additional study personnel notes that needed to be added onto that, you might keep it unverified until that has been entered and then pass it on to completed status. There's a group of applications over here on the side that give you a little peek at what's available. Like I say, the study calendar, all your data exports and reports, your data import tool. This is the logging that I talked about, the audit trail, and all kinds of the data quality and data management tools are there as well. And last but not least, we'll jump into talking about Qualtrics. Qualtrics is enterprise licensed through OSU, through the OCIO's office. Anyone with a name.number can have an account. It's probably, which makes it probably the most widely available tool on campus. And I would say probably the preferred tool of the OCIO just because it's something that they manage. It's probably also the only tool that's available to students without faculty support. Any student can have a Qualtrics account. Data can be collected anonymously or from an identified list, the same as Redcap. Qualtrics has also been used with Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a good way to get survey responses from a broad sampling of folks. And if that's something that you're interested in, we can certainly give you more information about what that looks like. I think Qualtrics' strength is it's really ideal for single surveys. One survey going out at a time, or maybe two. Um, it's also used quite a bit, a little bit outside maybe its intended purpose, but it's really good at administrative functions. Um, for example, RSVPs to workshops such as this one. Our Office of Research uses Qualtrics pretty extensively for workshop registration. It's an easy way to sign people up and see who's responded and all that kind of thing. Um, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for longitudinal studies unless it's a longitudinal study where the ongoing data management isn't critical. It doesn't really matter whether the participant completes the follow-up form on time. A pre-post situation where they take the pre-survey, then something happens, and then they do a post-survey, and it's not really critically time dependent. Qualtrics may work well for that. And as such, being a widely available enterprise tool, unlike SurveyMonkey and some of the other tools that have been used in the past, it's unlimited, unlimited number of surveys, unlimited number of responses. So the pros to Qualtrics are it's got a good user interface. It's easy to build forms. Unfortunately, you can't do it through Excel like you can with Redcap, which I don't necessarily understand because they're both basically CSV based at the end of it all. But not my who am I to say, I guess. But it's I would say Qualtrics might be a tiny bit easier than Redcap to use. But they're pretty equivalent in terms of ease of use. Because Qualtrics is used across many industries, not just research. That offers up some unique question types that aren't available in Redcap. There's a heat map option. There's pick, group, and rank. Net promoter score. I don't know how relevant net promoter score would be in the research environment, but I've been known to push the boundaries of what intended data field types are used for. So there may be a creative use that you could use it for. If you're using a defined contact list, Qualtrics gives you the ability to randomly assign participants into groups. So you could do a pre-post of an intervention and control that way. You just tell it, assign this group to a arm or a group that hasn't already been assigned to. You'll tell it, give me 10 people out of my list of 100 into this group. And it just randomly does that. And you can control how random that is. And probably the biggest pro is that there's no cost. It's free. There are a few premium features with Qualtrics that aren't included, but that are available for an additional cost. One of those that I think is the most promising is SMS distribution. So doing form completion and form distribution through text message. Obviously, that's not an option for a long longitudinal study, but for quick little surveys of a particular focus group or something like that, I think that shows a lot of promise in being a good way of collecting quick data quickly. There's a couple of other features that aren't included in the Qualtrics package, but it's 99% of the stuff you need is included at no cost. Similar to Redcap, the design is pretty inflexible unless you have some additional programming skill. You can do some layout with CSS, but mostly it would be JavaScript that you would use to significantly alter the look of a Qualtrics form. There are a number of approved skins, if you will, for OSU that are branded for particular departments. Excuse me. Each unit on campus gets one skin for free that's branded with their unit identifier and formatted in a way that they choose. If you want additional skins, say for a particular study, you want a study branded a particular way, that would be an additional cost. But other than that, the design is pretty much you have a few choices in what your layout looks like, but I would say it's maybe a little bit less flexible even than Redcap. You don't have a lot of control about whether the questions are vertical or horizontal, or it's pretty tied down. And like I said before, I wouldn't really recommend it for longitudinal and definitely not multi-center studies. And at this point, you can't use it for S4 data, so that is a limitation as well. So this is the Qualtrics interface. Similar to Redcap, one of your first landing pages is the list of projects and surveys that you have going, and it does a similar thing in telling you whether it's active or whether it's still in development. Shows you how many responses you have. This gives you a little bit of trend data of how many responses you received frequently, and it's got some links right to your reporting. This is the data entry or the form design interface. Again, it's fairly straightforward and easy to figure out. If you've done Google Forms, I think is probably the closest thing to it. It's very similar to designing a form in Google Forms. You can create your own kind of question library or your own form library. Unfortunately, there's not a shared library like there is in Redcap. So it's up to you to build your own little form library. If you're going to use the same demographic form over and over, you can put that entire form in your library, or you can also just put specific questions in that library. If you have a pretty long, involved scoring question, for example, that you've taken a lot of time with branching logic and calculated fields and whatnot, you can save just that question and be able to pull that into other surveys. And then, as you can see, you just create a new question and you're off and running. This is the preview of the different question types available in Qualtrics. As I said before, many of those are unique to Qualtrics. The rank order, constant sum, drill down, heat map, gap analysis. Probably one of the most useful that I have found is the timing and the metadata. This includes how long participants spend on individual questions or on a page, and the metadata collects what site they came from. So if you've put a link on a Facebook page or on Twitter, it will tell you that that's where the participants launched from, that they found your link on Twitter. It will tell you what operating system they used, whether it was a PC or a Mac. It will also tell you whether or not they used a mobile device or not. So all of these tools that we've talked about, how do you know which one is the right fit for you? So this is a little table of comparison. These are all the same things I've already talked about, but this is in kind of a side-by-side format to give you a look at one tool versus another. And as we said before, we're going to provide these slides, so you don't have to spend a whole lot of time trying to chart this out and and take notes on it. You will have it at your disposal to review and view at your leisure. One of the things we hadn't talked very much about is the export formats, and that this provides a quick little review of that. Qualtrics exports in CSV, which you can then do whatever you want to with it. Redcap has several different formats. The last time that I was involved with Redcap, the SPSS and SAS exports were a little awkward. They exported two different files, and some of the statisticians I talked to said they really didn't like the way that it divided those things up, and they ended up just exporting it as CSV and pulling it in that way. That may well have changed. They may have improved that quite a bit, and I need to amend StudyTracks. They have changed that as well. Now they can export to all those different formats. And as I said before, I thought that's probably the cleanest export to the various stat packages that's available. And TellForm, the export format, it goes right into a SQL database or some other database that has an ODBC connection. So there really isn't an export as such. It goes into the database, and then you do with it as you will from the database. So this is the comparison chart of features. Again, just kind of looking side by side at each tool, what they offer, how they differ. Um, as you'll see, all of them offer pipe text, but TellForm is probably the most limited in terms of some of the things that it offers, because being paper-based, some of the things like participant randomization, that has to be done separately. You do your randomization in some other format, and then you would physically divide those forms up and send them out. This is a quick little recap of some of the unique features of each one that sets it apart from all the others. And a quick word about data dictionaries. Again, something that I think is sometimes overlooked, but a valuable part of study management. And that's kind of your data structure and your metadata of telling you, what's lying underneath this data. If you have numeric values, it can tell you what the text value of that was. I think it's a great idea to have a copy of that code book or data dictionary available to study staff. Put that in everybody's hands so anybody that's looking at the data should have a copy of the data dictionary. In Redcap and Qualtrics, the data dictionary is automated. You just export it. With Qualtrics, my best advice is to export it to Word. But it does have all the coding and all the branch logic and skip logic with it. You can do a little fancy dancing with formatting to make it a little nicer to look at, but it's pretty accurate. And Redcap's data dictionary is in an Excel file, which is nice if you're going to tie that into a stat package or some other analysis tool. You've got the lookup fields right there and ready to go. TellForm has to be done by hand. The way I used to do it was I would print a PDF of each of the forms, and then I would just, in Adobe Pro, I would just go over and put labels on everything, which was kind of a pain in the neck. But as I said, I'm pretty pro data dictionary. I think it's important. StudyTracks, they export that in XML. So depending on what you're going to do with it and where it's going to go, you may have to do some additional dancing around with that guy. So how do you know what's right for your project? I had forgotten these were separate. This is just a very quick comparison of some use case scenarios. By no means is it comprehensive. The best thing that you can do is to contact the Research Methodology Center, and between Sandy and I, we can help you figure it out. She comes from the methods side of things, and I come from the technology side of things. So between the two of us, I'm sure we could set you off in the right direction. As I said, Qualtrics is accessible to almost anyone at no cost, great for one-time surveys. Redcap, great for medical research and longitudinal studies. If you have multiple arms or you need to do blinding, you can have data access groups where certain people can be assigned to a group where they can't see some of the other forms. StudyTracks provides that feedback portal to participants, and if you need extensive customization, that might be an option. TellForm is great for those times that you can't use a web-based solution or you are required to have 21 CFR compliance. These are the contacts for each one of those tools. If you are in EHE, all you have to do is send an email to the service desk or call the service desk up on the phone and say, I want Qualtrics. For all the other departments across campus, that's handled through the OCIO's office. They have a self-service kiosk on the website that's linked there, and you just click on that and it'll walk you through what you need to do to get a Qualtrics account. Redcap, Amy Drake over at the Center for Clinical and Translational Science is the Redcap guru, and her email is there. StudyTracks, the CEO is John Putsky, and his email is there. And TellForm is Robert Rice over in the Nysonger Center, and that is his email. If you would like me to make any of these introductions to these folks, I'm more than happy to do that. Just shoot me an email, reach out to me, and I will get you linked up with one another. And that is all I have in my slideshow.
Well, thank you very much, Heather. That was really wonderful, and I thought maybe now I could open this up to some of the questions that have been floating in throughout the session. First of all, for those of you that are interested in getting the slides that Heather presented today, you should be able to find those on a Files window in your Carmen Connect section. And the file is called V1 Survey Tools Handout. If you download that, that should be the slide deck for this presentation. If you have any trouble getting a hold of that or need some additional assistance, just let me know either via the chat window or send me an email at the RMC, and I will make sure that you get the materials that you need. In going back and looking at some of the questions that came up during the presentation, Heather, there was some clarification on the OSU MCID requirement.
Okay.
One of the participants asked whether you still needed an OSU MCID in order to store data behind the OSU WMC firewall. And then another participant answered the question by saying, yeah, the OSU MCID is required, but the secure ID token is no longer required.
Okay. That was a good point of clarification. I know some of the folks that are involved in that question exchange, so it's not surprising at all that they leaped in with the with the correct answer. As I said, it's been a while since I've used Redcap, so some of those things may have changed.
It's a dynamic, it's a moving target.
It is, absolutely.
And the next question, can Qualtrics randomize to arms or blocks in the experimental mode? And I answered to the best of my knowledge that yes, in fact, you can randomize the form of the survey based on arms of an intervention or blocks. Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that function in Qualtrics,
Sure.
whether it's available in the other platform?
The way that I would recommend that you do that, there's a couple of ways. If you need to randomize to the various groups, I would do that through the contact list, like I said before, and just have it tell them, split this contact list in half or divide it, 3 sets of 10 or however you want it split up. If you want to control particular questions or sets of questions to those individual groups, you can do that through embedded data. So once you've identified who is in each group, you can put an embedded data marker in their record in the contact list, and then you can pull that embedded data into your survey logic. So when you're building your survey flow, you can say, if participant in group 2, then show this block of questions. If participant in group 1, then show this block of questions. Qualtrics has pretty sophisticated branching and randomization tools with it. You can also, if you don't need quite that level of randomization, you can also randomize just the order of questions in a section. So if you need questions presented in random orders, there's a function for that within the survey flow.
Yeah, that's really helpful to separate out those order effects that might be plaguing you in your instrument.
Right. Right.
The next question that I wanted to bring up, can you talk a little bit more again about you'd mentioned the limitation with Qualtrics and being able to upload CSV data or questions that were in a CSV file and that Redcap could do that. Could you clarify how you can enter questions into Redcap using, in alternative ways to what Qualtrics can do?
Okay, sure. I think probably the best way to do that is to show it. So I will go back to sharing my screen. And if you give me just 1 second, I will pull up Redcap. If I can find my bookmark. So here's my Redcap. And if I hop over to the data dictionary, I can download the current data dictionary. So the data dictionary and form design is kind of one and the same. So if I download the current data dictionary, it gives me a CSV file. And CSV file up. And this is what that looks like. So it's showing you what the variable name is, what form it's on, if it has a section header, what type field it is, the field label, the choices that go along with it, any notes, validation if you're validating for a text field, and your branching logic is controlled through here. So this is why I don't recommend that you just start doing this out of the gate, because until you get used to the syntax of how this is designed, it can be a little tricky. But once you get familiar with it, it's really quick. And the nice thing about it is if you have these same fields that you want to ask on another form, you can use the good old friend copy and paste, and you just paste that in here and you say, oh, I want this now, this section to be on my sample form. So then you can just do that, and then you save it. And I don't know that I have crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's when I'm doing this. So this may not work. But then you just find that same file that you used, upload it. Yeah, it's telling me errors. Oh, because the variable names were duplicated. But that's in theory, that's how you would do it. You would open up this this data dictionary Excel file and make whatever changes you want to it, and then re-upload it back into Redcap. This can be a huge time saver,
Oh, I
especially if
can
you're
see
doing
that.
those
Yeah.
repeated fields that we talked about. If you're asking, how many medications do you take, and you've got 15 spots, you can just duplicate that entire section, and then you can use find and replace medication 1 with medication 2. And it really is very nice to be able to do it that way. As I said before, I don't know why Qualtrics doesn't do that, because I know the underlying structure is this same format. So I don't know why that is, but that's probably the difference between a university created tool and a corporate created tool.
Right. The university had it right there and trying to understand what the most convenient way is to create those items and then get them uploaded.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I think you pointed out that RedCap was specifically designed for researchers, and I think that is something that I'm seeing as you're going through the slides, that's apparent. That there are many things that have been thought through that make it easier for researchers to use.
Right, right. Qualtrics is a great tool, and it has a lot of uses. Certainly, if you're doing a one-off survey, that's the quickest and easiest way to get it up and going. But really, for any kind of longitudinal study, I would tend to steer out of Qualtrics.
Well, thanks for clarifying that, Heather. Another question that came up, any idea of the time frame for approval to use to collect S4 data in Qualtrics? It
I
sounds like
don't.
efforts are underway.
Yep. It's underway. I unfortunately don't have any kind of timeline on that. Anything having to do with enterprise software on campus moves less than a snail's pace. So, but I know they are working on it, because they do recognize that that's a pretty significant gap in the usability of Qualtrics, and I know that Qualtrics is used in that capacity at other places. So it has the capability to do it. It's just a matter of jumping through all the hoops of getting the documentation done and all the things that are required that go along with that.
Right. Another question that came up was about sharing the administrative rights to various surveys within these different platforms. Specifically, with Qualtrics, I know that when you create a new instrument, you can share it with limited rights or with full rights with other people that have OSU login. So if I want to encourage a student to help me with the survey, editing it or administrating it, I can provide those rights to that student. Can you talk a little bit more about how that sort of collaboration works in the two platforms?
Sure. Again, I'll just kind of do a quick shared screen so we can look at that. So in Qualtrics, when you have a form that you want to share, you have the option to share the project, and then you pick a person that you want to share it with, and it brings up a list of all the people, all the possible people that you would want to share with that, and that's really any other Qualtrics user on campus.
So that student, if I wanted to share with them, would have to register for a Qualtrics account first.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
I don't know why we're having difficulties with this. Let's see if we can go at it this way. There we go. So I'm going to share this form with Kim, and it shows me here what my options are. She can edit the details. She can view the details of reports. She can activate it or deactivate it. She can copy it. She can distribute it. So you set those rights there. I don't think it has this robust of user control and rights control that Redcap has, again, partly due to the design of it being for research studies. They recognize the granularity sometimes of the control that you need over certain features. Qualtrics is pretty limited to this kind of a shared project, but
Heather,
you can definitely share this among people.
Heather, this is Kim. One other thing that we did with our Office of Research is, I'm not sure how it got set up, but and I think it was probably OTEL, our tech group here in EHE, that they set up a team folder for us, and so anybody that creates a survey can put it in that team folder, and so we can see everybody else's, so it doesn't have to just be shared with one person. So right. I'm not sure how that happened, but it sure is convenient.
Yep, that you are right about that. They do have the ability, the Qualtrics division administrators and brand administrators have the ability to create groups. You talk to them about what group you need and who needs to be in that group, and they can create that for you. Qualtrics is kind of having some growing pains in terms of coming from each department had their own Qualtrics license at one point, and then when they rolled it up to enterprise, they're still kind of figuring out how the management of that works. So the way they have it structured now is there's an Uber group of brand administrators that can do everything to do with Qualtrics, and then each academic unit has a division administrator or a couple of them. And as I've talked to in the users groups, each college has kind of implemented that a little bit differently. In EHE, you have to go through the OIT group to get a group approved, and then they select the people that are in the group, and they're a little bit controlled about how many groups they put out there and how many groups people can belong to. Other colleges, it's just anybody that wants a group can have a group. So it varies a little bit across departments in how that's implemented.
And I wanted to add, too, that we've, here in the RMC, we've had a couple of interesting experiences in using this sharing function. Oftentimes we create a survey and then copy it, and have only found out after some time that when you copy an instrument, it doesn't take the sharing privileges along with it. So you may assume that your colleague can see both the original and the copied survey, and they can't. So, maybe setting up a group among folks that are collaborating often would make that problem a little bit easier to deal with.
Right, absolutely.
And then
certainly for a shared study personnel where you're developing multiple surveys for that study, I would definitely go the group route.
Yeah, and then the second issue that we ran into, I was working with one of the RMC clients to create a survey, and so she shared administrative privileges with me so that I could edit the survey. And it wasn't only until a little bit later in the project, after she had collected data, that we realized that as an administrator, I had access to see her data as well. And yet I was not written into the IRB approval for that study. Right. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you are sharing administrative privileges with folks, is that you should pull those privileges back when you start into data collection, especially if that person is not listed on your IRB approval for access to data.
True, that's a very good point.
Are there any other questions? I think we've gone through everything that came up during the talk. Does anyone else have anything that they'd like to ask Heather regarding these platforms? I think we have something else coming in here. Well, if there are no other questions, then I just want to wrap up with everybody. We'll leave the room open for a little while in case you'd like to ask something via the chat. And again, remind you all that there are handouts in the files box on your screen. It's the slide deck itself is called V1 Survey Tools Handout. Feel free to download that. And then Heather's also included the research data policy and the chart that looks at the different data elements and the security issues with all of those. And I want to thank you all for attending our first webinar. It was really fun, and I hope we hope to see you again soon in one of our live events or something on the web again sometime. Thanks all, and I hope to see you again.